All politics is identity politics. Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm DeAnna. The Supreme Court has heard the arguments on birthright citizenship, and the overall debate surrounding the issue has been revealing, shall we say. It's going to be a while before we get any kind of decision, but we should think about what the debate itself signifies. Somehow, within just the last few years, and I think in response to Trump, the consensus has basically become that it is immoral to restrict access to American citizenship to anyone for any reason, even if, as in the cases of birth tourism, they admit it's basically overt fraud. It was not always this way. So, for example, this is Harry Reid, Democratic Senator of Nevada, later became Democratic Senate Majority Leader, bemoaning the stupidity of birthright citizenship and how many babies are being born to illegals in Los Angeles.
If making it easy to be an illegal alien isn't enough, how about offering a reward for being an illegal immigrant? No sane country would do that, right? Guess again. If you break our laws by entering this country without permission and give birth to a child, we reward that child with U.S. citizenship and guarantee of full access to all public and social services this society provides. And that's a lot of services. Is it any wonder that 2/3 of the babies born at taxpayer expense at county-run hospitals in Los Angeles are born to illegal alien mothers? Just when the American people think nothing can be more absurd than the way we deal, or rather don't deal, with illegal immigration, they discover that we have a political asylum system that would qualify us for Senator Proxmire's Golden Fleece Award 1,000 times over. I don't know why he didn't make this award. He should have.
Got to agree with him. Or here, socialist Bernie Sanders in 2015, denouncing the very concept of open borders as inherently an attack on labor, wages, and the nation state.
Open borders? That's a Koch brothers proposal. The idea, of course, I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of the global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that. If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States, or UK, or Denmark, or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people. What right-wing people in this country would love is an open border policy. Bring in all kinds of people who work for $2 or $3 an hour. That would be great for them. I don't believe in that. I think we have to raise wages in this country. I think we have to do everything that we can to create the millions of jobs. Do you know what youth unemployment in the United States of America today? If you're white, a white kid, high school graduate, 33%, a Hispanic, 36%, African-American, 51%. You think we should open the borders and bring in a lot of low-wage workers? Or do you think maybe we should try to get jobs for those kids? So I think from a moral responsibility, we've got to work with the rest of the industrialized world to address the problems of international poverty, but you don't do that by making people in this country even poorer.
Now you may be thinking to yourself, right-wing Koch brothers proposal. Well, yeah, he's right. I mean, as Peter Brimlow never tired of reminding me back in the day, the Wall Street Journal used to advocate a constitutional amendment that would read, there shall be open borders. Like, this is the extreme capitalist position. And it makes sense. If the country is an economy and you want wages to be as low as possible, you need what Karl Marx called the reserve army of labor, basically the unlimited scabs and population of the third world. Senator Dianne Feinstein in California, Democratic senator, this is what she said in 1993.
Should you have a system where people can come to this country, even if they're well-to-do, get on Medicaid and give birth to a baby and then go back? The answer is no. And we know that Medicaid laws are being used and abused to do just this in the state of California. I'd like to see that stopped. About 13% of the California prison population, costing close to $300 million a year, are illegal aliens. I've had judges in Los Angeles and Orange County tell me 1/2 of their criminal dockets are illegal aliens. Presently, a convicted illegal alien has the option of serving their sentence in California or being returned to their country of origin. I think that option ought to be removed.
And you can find tons of these. You can find Hillary Clinton saying the same kind of stuff. Now, does anyone think these problems have gotten better or worse? Does anyone think anyone has changed their mind about any of these issues, that they've seen some kind of new evidence? I mean, look at the age of some of the people in the Senate or the House. Some of these guys are the same people. I mean, here's one. Chuck Schumer, 1996, talking about how we need to stop fraud in immigration.
This is an anti-fraud amendment. Over where we go, people say, well, why can't you stop illegal immigrants or others from coming here? And the number one answer we give our constituents is when they come here, they can get jobs, get benefits against the law because of fraud. And here, the gentleman from Florida has put together the most effective anti-fraud measure we can find without it changing the actions of the government one bit. And we find all this opposition. Ladies and gentlemen of this chamber, what I worry about is that this bill, which started out with good intentions, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, is going to end up being the same kind of thing that the public gets angry with us on. We say we're doing something, and we do nothing. Because every time someone makes a rational and small proposal to get something done, people say, well, what about this hypothetical, that hypothetical, etc. I urge support of this amendment. If you believe you want to stop fraud in immigration, you have no choice but to support this amendment.
But then you get Chuck Schumer in 2008. What is he saying? We need to be opposed to immigration. We shouldn't even use phrases like undocumented immigrants.
When we use phrases like undocumented workers, we convey a message to the American people that their government is not serious about combating illegal immigration, which the American people overwhelmingly oppose. If you don't think it's illegal, you're not going to say it. I think it is illegal and wrong.
So over the course of a decade, essentially his position doesn't change. But then here he is more recently saying we need to have a path to citizenship for 11 million or however many there are. And of course, listen to the term that he uses to refer to these invaders.
The only way we're going to have a great future in America is if we welcome and embrace immigrants, the dreamers and all of them, because our ultimate goal is to help the dreamers, but get a path to citizenship for all 11 million or however many undocumented there are here.
Yeah. There it is. Now you tell me, do you think he changed his mind? Do you think he had a moral awakening or something? Now, like Politics 101 here, first lecture I ever heard on politics when I first was working at a place called the Leadership Institute, just kind of movement conservative place. This lecture was called The Real Nature of Politics, given by a political consultant by the name of Mike Rothfeld. I don't know what he's been up to. It was a million years ago. It doesn't matter. But he was right about this. He said it's a waste of time to try to change the opinions of politicians themselves. And you wouldn't believe how many people try to do this. And he gave the example of abortion, which was one of the issues he cared about. And he told a story about going to see all these Republicans, and they would literally watch the footage of an abortion and see the actual procedures they were allowing. And what would they do? They would find it harrowing, and they would cry, and then they would pray together, and there'd be these promises of a great spiritual awakening, and they'd make all sorts of promises, and then the next day they would just vote to keep it going. Now, here's the thing, and this is what people don't understand. Maybe he didn't even understand. It's not that they were lying or that they didn't mean it. It's just that it doesn't matter. A politician is always going to respond to incentives. Their personal opinion, to some extent, does not matter except in very rare cases with very rare people and very specific circumstances, and probably only like one or two issues for any given person. And if your political survival depends on something, you are going to convince yourself that whatever you have to do is also the moral thing to do, and the appropriate thing to do, and the patriotic thing to do for the country. Now, I don't know if this makes me more cynical or less cynical. I don't know if I'm being naive or insanely jaded with this, but I think Chuck Schumer probably believed what he was saying every single time he said that stuff. He probably isn't even aware that he changed his mind. What changed? His political interest changed. Immigration used to be an issue that united both parties. Insofar as anyone was really pushing it, it was the big business lobby more than anyone else. But now you essentially have a country or several countries within the country. You have nations within the nation, and these nations vote as blocks. And white Americans, simple souls that we are, do not. Because we think in terms of our stupid principles and our stupid ideals, and so we get eaten alive. And the incentives are just different. These Democrats all shifted left, or more accurate, I don't even know if left is the right term here. They shifted more to the open borders position because they knew they would win the block votes of all these ethnic groups. And that's how they would stay in office. And all the other arguments were just forgotten. It's just the incentives that matter. And not just fraud, not just the national interest and our identity or national security, because, fuck that, right? But even the stuff that as progressives they used to talk about, wages, opposing handouts to big business, the exploitation of workers. I mean, the whole point of illegal immigrants is that you can exploit them. Like if you legalized them and had to pay them the same as everybody else, they would be worthless. Now you would just have sullen, stupid workers who cost as much as actual Americans. So what good are they? The whole point is you can just kind of churn through them. As a leftist, you would think that they would be mad about this. You would think that progressives would be angry about this pattern of exploitation, and they used to be. But this is the great genius of being anti-white. In a weird way, they've solved class conflict. Let's look at this from a different perspective. You're not going to like this. I don't like going through this. And you know my position on right versus left, right? Like they're real, they matter. There's no getting beyond right v left. But we should talk about like how this is developed. Why is this happening? There has to be a reason for it. Somebody has to be benefiting, right? It's not just like, oh, everyone's stupid. Think about some of the conflicts we've talked through on this program. The Spanish Civil War, you guys on the Ko-Fi, we did a whole audio special on the Spanish Civil War, going through the whole war. We did a bonus episode on Son of the Century, the book and the television show about the rise of Mussolini and the fascist seizure of power. We had the guy from Antelope Hill on to talk about Mussolini's writings. We did a lot on the history of fascism and the class conflict in interwar Italy. We're going to be doing a lot more soon on the Bolsheviks, on Lenin, on the anarchist and communist movements in this country that did a lot more damage than people think here in the United States. And we're all familiar with the class struggle in Germany in the 1930s, all the abortive communist revolutions that took place in Hungary, Bavaria, places all over Europe in the interwar years, especially just after World War I. What is the common thing? What's the common element? When you look at Italy, and Spain especially, it really looked like you could not govern the country. The split was class. The class war was so strong that the society was essentially disintegrating, and it was an identity. Like to be a worker was one's identity, and hatred of the king, the military, the church, even the nation itself. Somehow this all fed into it. Like the nation itself was a bourgeois trick. Like this is how they would talk about it. A couple weeks back, we were talking about a study that said just about everybody defines morality, like who is the good guy or bad guy in a given situation, based on victimhood, right? The victim, the exploited, is the good guy. And you think to yourself, well, how did far-right movements that I've always been told were built on domination and hierarchy and these kind of Nietzschean values, how did they take power? Were people really so different? Well, no, they're not telling you the full story. In Germany, in Italy, even in Spain, even though Francisco Franco was way more of a thrown and altar 19th century conservative, the answer was that they were transcending the class struggle. That was the far-right nationalist pitch to the people. There was actually a social justice element to it. We are actually taking care of the oppressed. We're going to use nationalism to bind the people together. We're going to end the class struggle. A strong central government and the leader is going to check the reactionaries and the rich and the privileged and the reds and deliver to the workers. And that's how we're going to go forward. Like you actually are appealing to, we are going to save the victims. And it worked. Because when you look at a lot of European countries after World War I, it really did look like they were all going to fall apart. I mean, look at the United States even. Look at the kind of stuff that used to happen in America in states like West Virginia. Now it's as red state as it gets. But it used to practically be in a state of civil war, coal miners fighting with the National Guard and stuff. The redneck revolt types, the lefty rural socialist types, they're not actually wrong about that. Nationalism was the solution, but two problems. One, after World War II, rightly or wrongly, and we would say wrongly, Western leaders concluded that nationalism is the worst thing ever, and we must never allow patriotism or strong national identities to be mainstream in Western countries ever again. The post-war consensus, the post-Nuremberg legal order, is basically that it's illegal to be right-wing. That sounds insane, but that's actually how it works. It is illegal to be right-wing in the West today, to be actually right-wing. And two, you can't go back to the class struggle that really defined the post-war era after World War I. But you're not allowed to have nationalism to kind of bind the society together anymore. So what do? Especially if you actually have a geopolitical rival to think about. If you're in the West and you're defining yourself in opposition to the USSR and its model of communism, what do? Now, what I think they came up with, and I don't know how intentional it was. I'm not like pushing a conspiracy here. I'm not sure that somebody like sat down and said like, this is how it's going to be. But they essentially switched the left from an economic model to a cultural model. And at the risk of being conspiratorial here, this is simply a fact. It sounds crazy, but this is true. Elements of the US government, including the CIA, bankrolled and backed certain projects of non-Soviet aligned leftist artistic, political, and cultural movements. They bankrolled these things directly. Why? Because you want the left to be aligned with you, not with Moscow. All the artist types and cultural leaders and people like that. And this had a kind of beneficial side effect for them. And I don't know if it was intentional. And it's not something that really started happening on a mass scale until really recently. But once leftism is not about class and it's about culture and race, the left does not have a reason to oppose mass immigration anymore. The class war gets taken down a lot. Certainly has no reason to oppose immigration from the third world, especially not from the former European empires. And this trend has really been intensifying. If you take a step back, it is bizarre how there has essentially been no opposition whatsoever from the left to the idea that corporations should essentially have an unlimited reserve army of labor. Progressives are perfectly fine with the idea that corporations can get special visas specifically to underbid educated American workers to make sure that none of you can ever get a job in technology or engineering or science or even medicine. Like the idea of an American becoming a doctor, that's not allowed anymore. Why? We have to import these low-cost, relatively low-skilled replacements from Pakistan or India or whatever. And this is the progressive position. This is the pro-worker position. This is what we're being told. There was no resistance to this whatsoever from the left. And you have the complete breakdown of the kind of labor model that Americans even had in the 1950s. Like boomers maybe in some sense remember from their parents, and some of them probably enjoyed it too. You get a job. You work at that one place. You get a pension. After you retire, you actually get to retire. You have this kind of community built around this economic activity. Like this is just gone. None of us have ever seen this, just totally annihilated, nuked. And people will vaguely mutter about like, oh, neoliberalism or Ronald Reagan or something like that. But nobody really cares and nobody really identifies what's going on. Why? Because it's benefiting non-whites. And therefore it's considered morally good by anyone who matters. They get their factories in the countries abroad. You also import them here to underbid Americans for the jobs here. And it's such a moral good. Doing this, hurting white people, is the very definition of what it is to be a good person. So there is absolutely no resistance from the left. Even anti-globalization. You may remember this from around the turn of the century, right before 9/11, right around the year 2000. When I was in college, it was the big thing. People going on and on about the Zapatistas and the Battle of Seattle and how globalization is Americanization. We need to support like French farmers running tractors into McDonald's and all this kind of stuff. The left was doing this and then it just stopped, right? It just dropped off the face of the earth. You never hear about it anymore. Rage Against the Machine went from doing concerts against the World Trade Organization to Tom Morello soy-facing about Star Wars at Disneyland. Like this tweet here. Like this is what happened to these people. How? Why? Well, devil's advocate argument for why do you want population replacement? Why do you want non-whites pouring into the West other than spite? In a way, it defanged the left. It no longer poses a real threat to capital. It negated class conflict. You don't have coal miners in Appalachia getting guns and shooting it out with the National Guard over wage increases or something. In fact, to be a good progressive today, if you think coal miners, white coal miners in Appalachia deserve good lives and like shouldn't have their kids forcibly taken away from them and trans and their houses given to people from the Congo, I mean, you're basically Heinrich Himmler, right? I mean, this is the state of the discourse. Who in this country are you not just allowed to hate, but encouraged to hate, practically required to hate? The white working class. They are despised in a way that is practically genocidal. And I would suggest there is something useful about this, and this is why it's happening. It's just the old Frankfurt School cultural Marxist thing of, oh, the white working class didn't deliver the Reds the revolution they wanted. They were too culturally conservative, so they need to be replaced. Yeah, there's something to that, and that's part of it. But I also think there's something more in that it solves a problem for capital. It defangs the economic radicalism of the left. You just don't have the same kind of militancy you once did. When you see a general strike in Minnesota, they were trying this a couple weeks ago. Who are these people? It's like government workers protesting ICE or something. They're not trying to like nationalize the means of production. And these people don't produce anything. Like if these people just went on strike forever, we would just save money and be better off. Like they're all just parasites. Like we don't actually need these people. They don't actually make anything. It's just a tax on us, basically. So there's a utility to race replacement from the perspective of capital, because also a mixed race population is in some ways easier to manage. It's easier to prevent them from organizing. You don't have the same kind of militant socialism you once did. The socialism we have now is of a different sort. We'll get into that in a second. And critically, I think hatred of whites, envy of whites, resentment of whites, what we might call decolonization, which somehow even applies to Europeans in their European homelands. All of this makes sure that leftist fury is directed against useful targets from the perspective of capital. I mean, what is the stereotypical far left-wing activist today? It's a government employee, probably like a public school teacher, maybe an NGO worker who was also de facto a government employee because it's funded by the taxpayer. And what are they mad about? Like 15-year-old kids in a basement somewhere looking at edgy memes. Like this is what they're concerned about. This is what they're screaming for government action over. That's the left. That's what it is. It is the rage of a privileged class. And I don't know if this is a deliberate thing, like they planned it out and they came out this way. I think it may just be more incentives and systems playing out to the logical conclusion in a certain direction, and then the ideology develops after the fact to justify it and say it's a good thing. But this is what has happened to the left. I mean, let's look at a really important recent example. Take Cesar Chavez. You've probably heard of him. This was the guy. This was someone they were setting up to be the Hispanic Martin Luther King. Barack Obama wanted to give him a national holiday. He already had a state holiday in California. Who was he? Fundamentally, he was just a union organizer. That's what he was. Now, the thing is, the left is always driven by these kinds of cults of personalities. Every black person who gets shot by the police gets his portrait on signs held by the protesters. They cry like rest in power or some stupid thing. Every left-wing cultural advance was marked by a martyr and posthumous fame. Emmett Till, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Harvey Milk, Matthew Shepard. All these guys are political saints. And even those who were not cut down after they die still get religious trappings. I mean, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg gets devotional candles at your local bookstore or something. Egalitarianism is not a substitute religion. It is a religion. Understand this. Now, of course, many of these so-called saints have their dark sides. I mean, Emmett Till, for example, what could be more sympathetic than Emmett Till? Well, his story was way more complicated than the unprovoked murder that we're told about. He reportedly assaulted a woman before all that stuff went down, and she never recanted her story. Martin Luther King, supposed minister, in addition to not actually believing in the Christian religion, he was also a pervert who reportedly laughed as a woman was raped in front of him. Malcolm X. Malcolm X was famously eulogized by Ossie Davis as our living black manhood. Well, he was an adulterer and a cuck and probably a homosexual prostitute. Harvey Milk had sexual relationships with underage boys. Matthew Shepard was reportedly in a sex for methamphetamine deal when he was killed. He was not an innocent victim of an unprovoked hate crime. You never hear about this stuff. You just hear about the stories. Well, what about Cesar Chavez? Now, if you don't know again who this guy was, he started the United Farm Workers, basically one of the most important parts of the Chicano movement. He was the guy who was organizing these Mexican-American workers for better treatment. It's fundamentally an economic thing, right? But it starts getting wrapped into all this identitarian, nationalist, ethnic chauvinism. So, for example, I'm going to show you the logo of the UFW here. And you're going to say, is that explicitly based on what I think it's based on? What do you think? But it's cool, guys. It's an Aztec eagle. It's not a Prussian one. It's totally different. Anyway, now, there are all these kind of rumors about Cesar Chavez. Again, it's not that the media covers up this stuff. You can find it. They even talk about it. It's just they don't emphasize it, so it just kind of goes over the head of the normies. So Jared Taylor reviewed a biography of Chavez in 2014. This is 2014, way back when, and concluded that he was, quote, a deceitful, foul-mouthed, philandering, sociopathic ecomaniac who pretended to be a saint, unquote. He was a racial huckster. He was more corrupt and vicious than even Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton, but he was untouchable until recently, even though this is not ancient history. I mean, How recently was he untouchable? How recently was he a hero? Our last president, Joe Biden, had a bust of him in the Oval Office right behind the Resolute desk. So like every picture of him had it. There it is. But now, with remarkable speed, Cesar Chavez is being canceled. And it's amazing how quickly the state and the left can move when it actually wants to. So, New York Times reported in late March that Chavez sexually abused underage girls for years, leading with a story about an alleged statutory rape of a 13-year-old when Chavez was 45. Among the alleged victims was fellow organizer Dolores Huerta, a co-founder of the United Farm Workers. Now 96 years old, she alleges that Chavez raped her, but she remained silent for 60 years lest she hurt the farm worker movement. In one case, she said she was manipulated and pressured into having sex with him, and I didn't feel I could say no because he was someone that I admired, my boss, and the leader of the movement that I had already dedicated years of my life to. In the second case, it seemed to be much more forthright. She was forced against my will, so just straight up raped. Remarkably, she got pregnant both times, and she kept the children, but she had them raised by other people to keep the secret. Now, this last detail is why I'm actually inclined to believe her. And this is the two of them in better days. The New York Times also claims that it uncovered extensive evidence to support the accusations of several other women against Cesar Chavez who died in 1993. The accusations include sexual assault against girls as young as 12, with at least one alleged victim claiming to have attempted suicide as a result. The Times investigation found that Mr. Chavez also used many of the women who worked and volunteered in his movement for his own sexual gratification. So therefore, there is little reason to doubt Dolores Huerta's claims, which seem very in character for Chavez. Now, this has erupted like a bombshell in the Southwest, and the speed and scale of his cancellation is remarkable, especially considering just a few months ago, you had all these state and federal efforts to give him a holiday as the Hispanic Martin Luther King. So California has already renamed Cesar Chavez Day as Farm Workers Day, removed him from the State Hall of Fame, and they're not alone. More than 60 schools nationwide are named after Chavez. Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Portland, Oregon, all these other cities are going to have to rename streets. Around the country, they're scrambling to cover up statues of Chavez, like with blankets and stuff. And it's incredible. It's hilarious. Because the determination to give Hispanics their own racial saint has now resulted in this kind of festival of iconoclasm. And if you remember what they did to General Lee and George Washington and Jefferson Davis and Thomas Jefferson and Teddy Roosevelt and Christopher Columbus, it's really hard not to be happy about this. The Associated Press reported just a few days ago, quote, Cesar Chavez Day events renamed, postponed, or canceled after sexual abuse allegations. Many of the celebrations and holidays honoring the late farm worker labor leader Cesar Chavez are being renamed, postponed, or completely canceled in the wake of allegations he sexually abused women and girls while at the helm of the United Farm Workers Union. Now, we already talked about California, but it goes beyond that. Return to the article. Minnesota lawmakers took similar action Thursday, sending a bill to Governor Tim Walz that would strip Cesar Chavez Day from the state's calendar. Texas Governor Greg Abbott announced last week his state would not observe the holiday this year. He directed all state agency heads to comply with the change. Abbott also said he would work with legislators to remove the holiday from state law. Lawmakers in Colorado are considering a bill to rename the voluntary state holiday there to Farm Workers Day. Denver renamed its annual celebration Si Se Puede Day while removing a bust of Chavez from a city park. Grand Junction, Colorado officials renamed an event there the Si Se Puede celebration. The Cesar Chavez Peace and Justice Committee of Denver canceled the celebration set for April 11th. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson's office said the state won't recognize Cesar Chavez Day, instead focusing on Dolores Huerta Day on April 10th, her birthday. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs has declined to recognize March 31st as Cesar Chavez Day, as she has in the 2 prior years. Hobbs spokesperson Melina Soto said last week, officials in Phoenix voted unanimously Wednesday to rename the city holiday Farm Workers Day, unquote. Now, is this all because they are suddenly so worked up about Cesar Chavez? I mean, you may not believe this, but what we have here, we've got a case of some Mexican guy creeping on underage girls. I know you're as shocked as I am. This has never happened before. Why now? Why do they care? Why did the New York Times decide to drop the hammer on this? Especially because this was always kind of known, at least some of this. None of this is that much of a surprise. I mean, you can read the biographies and such. It's all kind of there. Well, there may be more to it. In a 2006 American Conservative article entitled Cesar Chavez, Minuteman, Steve Saylor said that Chavez led protests at the INS to demand a border shutdown reported illegals to immigration authorities, and testified to Congress in 1979 that the INS was looking the other way with illegal immigration to encourage strike-breaking. He offered UFW staffers as reinforcements to stop border crossers, and some of them even beat up fellow Mexicans. Cesar Chavez also repeatedly called illegals wetbacks. Now, and keep in mind, here you got this union leader. He's protesting federal immigration law enforcement, not because he wants them to stop, but because they're not doing enough. Think about that. Now, is any of this surprising? Not really. What is the point of a union? Forget protest songs and mafia and jokes about not working and all this kind of stuff. What does a union do? Fundamentally, it controls the supply of labor. The point of a union is to say, look, we represent the workers. They're all signed up with us. You need to increase our pay. You need to increase our benefits and our working standards, and then we will work for you with a contract and we'll prosper together. But how does this break down? It doesn't work if other people outside the union can come in. And I know some of you guys may be in a union. If you're in a union, what do you call the workers who are not in the union, who come in to get jobs, especially during a strike, and break the power of collective bargaining? That's right, we call them scabs. That's Karl Marx's Reserve Army of Labor. And what is the best way to get scabs, especially when you're talking about farm workers in California and the American Southwest? Illegal immigrants. They're scabs. That is fundamentally what they are. So it makes sense that the UFW would be opposed to these people. It would make sense that you even beat the crap out of them to keep them from coming in. You have to be doing this if you're actually trying to defend your people, unless the UFW is not really a union anymore. And instead of an economic thing, it becomes more of a Mexican tribal allegiance and an ethnic pride group, and maybe even a kind of Cesar Chavez booster club that makes money. And that's basically what it turned into by the end. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details of this dude's life, but long story short, he basically went nuts by the end and was sort of operating like a cult leader. But think about it in terms of the politics of today, because that's more important. The UFW, Cesar Chavez, all of this is more useful to the system as a Chicano movement. Cesar Chavez as a Chicano leader, really a Hispanic leader. Hispanic's an artificial identity, but it's politically useful. It's an identitarian movement. Why? Because now illegal immigration is no longer framed as a cynical ploy to reduce wages. It still is, of course, but that's not how they talk about it. Now it's a heroic effort to reclaim the Southwest from the hated Anglos. It's a movement for social justice. It makes whites worse off. Isn't that inherently progressive? Yeah, it screws over workers, lowers wages, but who cares? To be a leftist today is to be anti-white. So what do? You throw aside Cesar Chavez now. You reinvent the entire history of the UFW. Now it's an ethnic thing. La Raza, rather than La Causa, as Steve Saylor said way back when. Now you have a holiday called Farm Workers Day that may raise awkward questions about how exactly mass immigration is supposed to raise wages. But if you just kind of, flap your wrists around and bitch about Trump and racism or whatever, the questions just kind of go away and everybody forgets about it. The likely result is we're just going to get a new hero cult. Now it's going to be around Dolores Huerta rather than Chavez because she's a victim. An individual person is politically more useful and engaging like in a farm workers, you can't be loyal to an abstraction. You want the hero cult, especially when the driving force behind the holiday is not high wages anymore, but Chicano triumphalism. And this kind of macho posturing that Cesar Chavez would do, that's outdated for today's progressives. Think of Dolores Huerta. She's a survivor. She's a victim of the patriarchy. This is far more compelling to progressives today. And we can probably expect Dolores Huerta Day and assorted street names and buildings and schools. But critically, this also means that those opposed to immigration can no longer draft Cesar Chavez posthumously as a kind of premature Hispanic Trump supporter, which is what people have been doing for a long time now. And I think that is why this is really happening now. But the bigger switch in emphasis is really what's important here. La Causa into La Raza. And in a weird way, they've solved the question of class war in the same way that you could argue fascist and nationalist movements solved it in interwar Europe. We're going to negate the issue of class because we're going to build up blood and soil nationalism. But the difference is we're not going to build up the nationalism in our own countries. We're actually going to ban that. We're going to throw those people in jail. We're going to shut them up. You don't get American nationalism or Italian nationalism or French nationalism. In fact, we're going to import foreigners into these countries, non-whites, and we're going to gas them up with the most insane blood and soil ideology you can imagine. We're going to tell them that they're entitled to decolonize European in these people's own countries. That's how far we're willing to go with this. That's the blood and soil nationalism that we're going to use. Now, can you get away with this indefinitely? I don't think so. This is a separate debate, but people talk about gay race communism or wokeness or whatever else. I don't really like any of these terms particularly. I'm not sure the linguistic kill shot has been developed here, but you now have a critical mass of third worlders such that you have a new form of socialism developing, but it's not really public ownership of the means of production. It's nothing like that. It really almost has nothing to do with what Karl Marx was talking about. We set up like fake charities and daycares and just pay people to do nothing and funnel money to NGOs. And we don't actually produce anything, and it's just sort of understood that the fraud and government waste is really a form of reparations. And that's why it's good. And the civilizational decline we've seen over just the last 10 years, both in Europe and America, it's been utterly remarkable. I mean, this is how it dies. This is how a first world country just becomes a giant slum. But there is no real collapse. The institutions stagger on. The country is still called the same thing. The rich keep most of what they own up to a point. You still have like the free market in some ways. One has to believe that at least some people in the elite are starting to look around nervously and are saying, you know, this is not really sustainable, but most of them don't. And it just kind of declines gradually. You don't get the crisis that you need. Why? Because nobody's really talking about a revolution. You're just redistributing a smaller and smaller pot of money. There's no longer the old school communist promise. I mean, you see this on like YouTube and stuff. There's sort of this nostalgia for Soviet stuff, Soviet wave and this kind of stuff. Why? Because there was something to it. There was this vibe of science and modernity and education and progress. It didn't deliver on those things, but it at least promised those things. It at least was trying to do those things. They don't even bother doing that now. Now, like the whole point is like welfare fraud to own whitey for the Belgian Congo or something. Like this is what the left is. It's not about helping workers, it's just anti-white hatred. And then you cobble together all these like nationalist movements for non-whites, which are their client populations. And that's all there is. But there are two opportunities for us here. One, if they won't represent white workers, we will. In fact, we have to. And unlike their workers, our guys actually work. And two, if this really is going to be a battle of identitarian nationalist movements, which it is, because all the left is at this point is a coalition of nationalist movements for their pet nons, the legitimacy of this approach has already been conceded. We just haven't begun to fight. Hey guys, quick reminder before we continue. You can follow Identity Politics on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our email list. If you believe in this work and you want to help us stay fully independent, you can support us directly on Ko-Fi. We offer bronze, silver, gold, and white membership tiers, or you can give a one-time contribution, whatever works for you. Every bit of support helps fund production, research, and our ability to speak freely without corporate or platform pressure. All the links are in the description below. Now back to the show. So, in a couple weeks, we've got a major election coming up in Hungary. J.D. Vance is actually being sent over to Hungary to try to talk up the administration of Viktor Orban. You may have seen a recent nationalist conference in Europe. I think it was actually CPAC Europe, where they were also talking up Orban. Orban has been an inspiration for many people in the nationalist movement for a long time. He has been a pioneer in what they call illiberal democracy. This is his term. And he has also been one of the few leaders who has managed to oppose the mass immigration being pushed by Brussels. Now, the guy running against him is a guy named Peter Magyar, which is a great name if you're running as a Hungarian candidate. Interestingly, and I think they've learned, they are running against Orban on a patriotic message. This guy also opposes immigration. He also says a lot of the same things that Orban does. But the difference is he says Orban is corrupt. Orban's regime has become stagnant. Orban's regime needs better ties with the European Union and all this kind of stuff. And there's also a big controversy about Ukraine. Hungary, of course, is right up against that conflict. Hungary does not want to get dragged into it, doesn't want to have to be providing weapons, doesn't want to have any of its territory violated or anything like that. And some might even quietly whisper that if Ukraine fragments, Hungary has something to gain in terms of territory. Remember, Hungary used to be a lot bigger than it is now. A lot of its territory was taken away. A lot of ethnic Hungarians actually live outside Hungary, including a population that is in today's Ukraine. A lot of people are really upset at Orban for trying to be cute when it comes to the competition between Russia and the European Union. That's why a lot of people are gunning for him right now. But to us, the question is this. Because the conventional reading on the nationalist right is going to be, look, you need to back Orban. Orban is a patriot. And this has now become like conservative movement rhetoric. Like Orban is based. Orban is the guy we need. But you have to ask yourself this. When you have a kind of, and let's be honest here, it's a kind of soft authoritarianism. I mean, not that the rest of the European Union is not, but it's a soft right authoritarianism as opposed to a soft left authoritarianism. But how does this work? You basically need to set up your cronies. You basically need to be giving them state funding. You need to make sure that they're on the payroll in some ways. You need to have political patronage. You need to have a political machine. Now, this is politics 101. I want to be clear here. I'm not offended by any of this. Like, you actually do need to do these things. He's been in power for like 16 years for a reason. Like, this is how it actually works with a democracy. But the problem is the longer it goes on, the more waste, the more excess, the more fraud, and the more people just inherently want a change. The problem here is that if they get rid of Orban, even if this guy who comes in is a nationalist or says the right things, is he essentially going to make terms with Brussels, and then Hungary gets subjected to the kind of nation-destroying waves of mass immigration that everybody else has been getting? Now, poll after poll after poll has shown that Orban is losing, and in fact losing quite badly. But he is crafty, and only a fool would count him out at this point. I have to say that the safe path is probably hoping that Orban wins. I'm hoping against hope that he can find a way to hang on. But the question for us is this. Is this kind of illiberal democracy a sustainable model? Because what you're trying to do basically is have the approach of normality and the aesthetics of democracy and formal power sharing and all these sorts of things, while actually it's an existential crisis if you ever lose power. Like, we have to win every single time. They only have to win once, and then they just open the borders and it's over. I mean, this is sort of the same situation we have here in America. And in many ways, the question that's being asked of patriots is basically the same. A lot of people are very upset with Donald Trump for very good reasons, not least foreign policy, but you can think of a million other reasons. And some might even say things like corruption. It's like, okay, but if you don't get this, you're going to get these people who are going to open the borders and destroy you. So you are essentially trapped in, you don't really get what you want, but we know if we go in this other direction, they're just going to kill you. And they're going to kill the nation too. In Hungary, it might not be so bad because this guy is campaigning as a patriot. I don't know. I am inclined to think that I want Orban to outlast this guy. I want Orban to stay in power. But that is not up to us. And it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But if Orban goes down, it's going to be a tremendous blow to this model of illiberal democracy that people have been talking up for a long time. And it may suggest something that will make us a bit uncomfortable. You can't make a halfway peace with these sorts of institutions. It has to be a revolutionary solution. If we ever actually do take power, it has to be clear that the transition is forever. We are not going back. We are not letting these people take power ever again. When we reclaim our homelands, and we will, we are keeping them run our way for our people forever, whatever political form is required. Talk to you guys next time. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Identity Politics. If you found this valuable and you want to see more of this kind of work, here's how you can help. First, follow the show and share it with people who need to hear it. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, TikTok, and you can also grab the RSS feed. Sharing it is the fastest way for us to grow. Second, sign up for our email list so we can always stay in direct contact no matter what the platforms decide. And most importantly, if you believe in our mission and want to keep it going, please consider supporting us on Ko-Fi. You can donate once or subscribe at the bronze, silver, gold, or white level. Every contribution, big or small, helps keep Identity Politics independent and alive. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you next time.